Greetings, I'm Bill Kladky, and I'd like to welcome you to today's edition of Neighborhood Beat. Our show today looks at civil rights in Maryland. Our guest is Mr. Keith Merkey, who does training and outreach for the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. Keith, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bill.
First of all, for those of our viewers who did not see the show that we did a while ago, could you please tell us a little bit about the commission?
Sure. The Maryland Commission on Civil Rights is the statewide organization that protects your rights in the area of housing, employment, and public accommodations, and commercial non-discrimination. And that, if you look at all different ones, for example, in employment, it could be whether you're hired or not, if you're discharged for an unfair reason. In housing, it could be, can you find a place, if someone's preventing you from finding a place to live because of a certain category of people that you're in, loans, if you're prevented from renting or living in a certain area. And public accommodations, we look at a lot of things like disability access, are buildings accessible, are services available to all persons within the state of Maryland. Commercial non-discrimination deals with state contracts, so that persons that are subcontractors are actually protected as well under our law.
I see. And what do you do for the commission?
Well, what I do is I do provide training for any group within the state of Maryland, whether it's an agency, a faith community, a nonprofit agency. We look at areas of things like discrimination prevention, conflict resolution, sexual harassment, sexual orientation issues, those kind of classes. I come out and do training. They're usually free of charge, always free of charge. And we provide them on site. So we work with you on your kind of needs. If something's going on or if it's preventative, we work with you on that.
How can someone get in touch with you, find out more information?
Well, you can call, if you want to call me directly, my phone number is 410-767-8560. Our 1-800 number for everyone within the state is 1-800-637-6247. You can also access our website, which is mccr.maryland.gov.
Great. Thank you. Let's first talk about housing discrimination.
Okay.
Because I know that that's something that was around when the commission was first started.
Right.
And still, unfortunately, is still around.
And I think as long as we have humans with their biases and prejudices, I think it will always continue to be, because, as you know, you can make a law, doesn't mean that people will still follow it. And unfortunately, people are still doing things that we thought might have been gone by now. So, when it comes to housing specifically, there's such issues that we see different kinds of issues arise in different areas. We might see more now with disability access. We talk about parking in apartment complexes and condo associations and things like that, that maybe people didn't think about when there were not as many cars. You didn't have your own vehicles 80 years ago.
Right.
So it was that kind of thinking has changed, and how we live, and even as Americans, I think what's happened is, like, we know as we've gotten older, we still want to do the things we love doing. We're not going to sit in our house when we're all of a sudden confined to a chair. We're not going to stay there. We still want to go out to eat. We still want to go enjoy public entertainment. We still want to get out of our homes. That's why you need curb cuts. That's why you need accessible sidewalks. That's why you need accessible parking and accessible doors and alleyways, everything like that.
Yeah, whether they're being used at that particular instant or not.
Right, correct. I always tell people, if we get it in place now, when you need it in 30 years, it'll be there. Or your family needs it, it'll already be there. And housing, so, we still have people who really think that certain people should not live in certain areas, that certain people should not live in my apartment complex, that, that certain kinds of people don't deserve the same thing I deserve. And that's kind of the basis of prejudice, but it's that thinking that my group is better than and deserves more than another group.
Yeah, I know. The original impetus for establishing the anti-discrimination laws in this country was the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
Right, and that's when our commission, we've been around since 1927 as an advisory to the governor and studied the problems that people of color were facing and everything like that, and went through many incarnations of names. And so by 1968, we became the Maryland Commission on Human Relations. And the impetus was Martin Luther King's assassination, and all of a sudden they found money for staff and for programming, and so that's when our agency really kind of took off. Our name changed 2 years ago to the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights because it's more in line with what we do. It sounds more like what we do because I would get calls for things like insurance, human relations, and things like that. So, but the impetus sometimes are traumatic events, worldwide events. The changes, and even our perception of persons of different ethnic backgrounds, 9/11, we would see a rise in ethnic violence and religious violence and things like that, and discrimination because of certain events. And so you have to tailor things sometimes to meet those, those challenges.
Absolutely, but I tell folks that anti-discrimination laws really are the basics of being an American, because as Americans, we are used to being a very diverse culture, a very diverse country. This is a country that is one of the most diverse in the world.
Right, and I think what happens is we get in our own little world within the United States.
That's right.
And we begin to think our world is the world, and not realizing that, just down the road there are people that are extremely different from us and their experiences are different. And so I think of realizing that even in the early experiments in the United States, I mean, there were, states were set up differently, and therefore you had the Puritans in Massachusetts, you had Baptists in Rhode Island, you had Episcopalians in Virginia, and even then, they were different religiously. Jews were not allowed in certain areas. They couldn't vote. They couldn't own property, things like that. So even in the early onset, we still had our issues, but over time, as our Constitution developed, as things we put things in place forbidding it, people still had their own private prejudices and biases, and they did act out against people. But in general, people in the United States realized we're pretty much, not necessarily, I always say not a melting pot, we're like a beef stew. So that you have potatoes and carrots and onions and beef, and you cook it all together, and you can still see all those components, so you're still unique, but you taste better when you're cooked all together.
I like that beef stew. I'm going to have to remember that one.
Yeah, because I don't want the cheese all melted together. We still have our unique identities, but at the same time, we share commonalities.
And that's really what the law is, because the law really is focused on where we intersect.
Right.
Rather than our private, we can do whatever we want privately.
Right.
But where it intersects other people, that's where the law comes in.
That's right. It's your behavior. It's like saying, I can't change what you believe. I can't force you to change your belief system, what you think. However, I can put things in place to prevent you from doing certain things, acting out upon that, because you can be as prejudiced as you want as long as you don't act upon it in the mistreatment of people, preventing them to get things that are fundamentally requirements to be an American. Your right to speak up, your right to practice your religion, the right to live where you want to live. Those kind of things are American qualities, and when people prevent that, then you're really not being very American.
Right.
You're not being American at all. So,
let's talk about the basics of the law
Okay.
in housing discrimination. What is legal and illegal?
Well, for example, in housing, our Fair Housing Act says that people should have the right to buy, rent, sell, live in an area that they so desire, and to make sure that while they live there peaceably. So people have no right to make where a person lives, so intolerable that they have to move, which is where we get into sometimes what we consider hate crimes in our housing area, where people are traumatized, and whether it's everything from swastikas painted on buildings to racial epithets. We want to make sure people be able to live in a neighborhood, safely and peaceably. We know we're going to have bad neighbors, people who play music too loud, people who have barking dogs, but the key is finding in the neighborhood that you have good neighbors. So some of the things that, we want people to have access to loans, access to affordable, housing, access to making sure that they can live in an area they so choose, not that someone directs them to certain areas, which is called steering. If a real estate agent says, "Oh, you don't want to live in that neighborhood," or I feel uncomfortable showing you that neighborhood," that's steering you away. What they can say is, like, if I were you, or what you can do is drive by the facility in the morning, noon, at night. See if you like the neighborhood. You need to decide that. But as another adult, I can't choose for you. So it could be discrimination based on gender and loans. If someone so decides that you, as a female, are not going to have a great credit rating, and so they're going to give you a higher mortgage rate without even really checking your credit. Well, first of all, that's not a good business concept. It really is not good business. And I'm sure the banks are learning that in loan departments. Or if someone says to a family, and they say, "Well, how many children do you have?" And you're like, "We have 2 children. I'm sorry, but we really don't rent to children, people with children. And unless you're senior housing and designated as so by HUD, you can't do that."
I guess the best thing is to, if you are in doubt, I
Right.
tell folks, if you are in doubt, if you get like an itchy feeling
Right,
in
right.
your stomach, or
Yeah.
you something just doesn't feel right,
Right.
the best thing to do is to call the professionals to check out what the law is.
Right, give us a call, because if you say this is what's happening, it might not be true discrimination, but there's still a problem, and there may be a way of, getting some information to the housing provider and saying, that might not be, the best business practice. For example, in the state of Maryland, you can discriminate based on a person's horoscope. So someone could say, "I don't rent to Libras," or "I don't rent to Geminis." And there's no law says that you can print. It's not good business sense, but there's no law preventing that. However, if you say, "I don't rent to people because of their familial status," "I don't rent to people because of their race, their color, their gender, their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, their disabilities," that becomes an issue. And there's always exceptions, like age. We don't protect age because we have senior housing, and elder housing that are their exemptions. But also, if someone is a risk to themselves or others, for example, if someone is a fire starter, if they live in an apartment building and starting fires, they can be evicted because they could kill 28 people or 68 people. And so we have to temper sometimes our law with rationality and go, okay,
Right.
there are some exceptions. But in general, we don't find those exceptions. Most are really people saying, "I was prevented from enjoying the benefits of living here," whether it's if you have a disability and you need a key for the side door because it's easier to get to the parking lot from the side door versus going all the way around the building. And, our apartment complex says, "We don't give out keys." Yeah, but I have a walking disability and it's closer to the parking lot and to walk all the way around. And they forbid that. Reasonable nature says, you give them a key, you know who has the key, you keep track of the key. It's not reasonable enough. They come and say, "Could you knock down this wall and put in a special lap pool for me because I'm having trouble swimming?" That's not reasonable.
yeah,
That's not reasonable.
But otherwise, it's a reasonable accommodation to do something that's
Correct.
not extremely costly, that's not extremely burdensome.
Right. And you look if it's going to be a benefit for other people as well. Is it going to be a benefit? For example, if you put in a non-key pass system, a key punch. You don't have keys, or even a card key thing. They would say that's cost a lot, but you know what? Everyone could use it.
Let's talk about how someone can file a complaint.
Okay.
Well, in other words, what happens if there's a problem?
Okay, if there's a problem, you can, give us a call at the early number. I said 1-800-637-6247. You can give us a call there. You can go online. For housing and disability complaints, you can file online. You can come in person at our office at 6 St. Paul Street. That's our Baltimore office, but we also have offices in Salisbury, Easton, Leonardtown, and Hagerstown. So we have them across the state. So you can call, you can write, you can send us a letter, and we have an intake officer that will be in contact with you and take your statement and find out what's going on. And that's real important because they can assess, like, we have time limits, 180 days. And so if you say it happened 8 months ago, we're not able to take that. However, HUD may be able to, or your local, Human Relations Commission might be able to. And so we want to make sure you have that access, and we may refer that or say, go with them. So
the tip is to call.
Give us a call, because we can do that.
Yeah, and it's free.
Oh, it's free, and so give us a call, and because we want to help you. And sometimes you may think it's one category that you're being discriminated on, and we may see or find another that you're not perceiving because you didn't think about that. So.
Right. Thank you. In terms of another, employment discrimination is something that unfortunately is always been with us, and frankly probably always will, unfortunately, like housing discrimination.
Right.
But I know that employment discrimination is something that touches an awful lot of folks, and it changes every now and then. What's currently the...
Well, the two that we still see as the highest, the two highest has always been predominantly race and now disability. That's our two highest. And employment is we have the largest number of employment cases versus housing. There's more employment. Of course, there's more people seeking work in the workforce. And with the downturn in the market and more jobs they're getting scarcer, people, unfortunately, one of the problems is people don't always complain because they're afraid of retaliation. And retaliation is just as illegal, and we have stats on the retaliation. And sometimes places are found not to be discriminatory in their practice or how they treat somebody, but they retaliated. And so they may get, a fine for retaliation and not for actual discrimination. So we tell people, especially workplaces, if someone's bringing a complaint, they have a right to bring a complaint. Everyone does have a right to bring a complaint. That's federal, state, they have a right to bring the complaint. So don't change how you treat them. Do not do things like demote them, move them, change their salary, isolate them. That becomes retaliatory, and we have to be very careful of that.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, what is the law about employment discrimination? What is discrimination?
Well, discrimination is when we unfairly treat someone different because of a category of people they are in, and it has nothing to do with their ability to do their job. And it's also, you look at things basing on rumors and gossip that gets around workplaces. So, for example, when you're talking about sexual orientation, if someone just thinks someone is gay, our law says even perception of a person's orientation, if someone does a behavior, like they think someone's gay and then the supervisor doesn't like gay people, decides to, give them a bad evaluation, even though 6 months ago they were the best employee that ever existed, and all of a sudden they start to isolate and cut them out of things. That right there, is a perception and therefore illegal behavior.
And because it is solely based on sexual orientation,
right.
if their work quality had gone down, or if they'd been more absent or whatever it was,
that's different.
Without leave, that's another thing.
And we do have that. Sometimes people discriminate against them, but when we look at their records, the subpoenaed records, we go, but you were late 36 times.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, or there was a violent episode, you got into a fight with somebody, and workplaces have a right to enforce those kind of rules. But I mean, it may be subconscious things. We have subconscious biases, and we might just pick somebody because we don't know why. We just feel more comfortable with them. But that being more comfortable may be because they're closer to our color, closer to our race, all of those things, and it's very subconscious sometimes. It's not always a conscious going like, let's see, we have too many women here, therefore let me just not hire any more women. It's just this maybe a subconscious feeling toward, and as humans there are people that we have more connection with and we do like more, but you need to look at who is best qualified for the position. Also, where are you advertising for positions? If all of your advertising goes to if you're not being diverse enough to say, if we're going to offer to college students, we want college students to come here, and you only focus on areas that are predominantly, for example, Caucasian, you don't advertise, at Morgan State. You don't advertise at, Eastern Shore. You don't advertise those places. You're not going to get a fair number of people coming in. So
that really does constitute targeting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's targeting for hiring is illegal.
Right, you want people to be the best person at the job. That's what you want. And I always tell people, if you have two people that are equal and you don't have a diverse workforce, you might want to add diversity to your workforce. But if they're not even, we are not telling you to hire people that are not qualified for the job, because that doesn't make sense either. So, but we encourage people, to check their biases, because sometimes we don't think about them and we just do them. And even in employment, we, of course, unfortunately have gender discrimination, which under that falls sexual harassment, which is, we're also seeing more men file with sexual harassment. So
let's talk about what sexual harassment, unfortunately, is something that seems to be spiking up lately.
Yes.
What is sexual harassment and what is not, please?
Sexual harassment is any unwelcome or unwanted sexual behavior, sexual advances, or verbal or physical behavior that is sexual in nature and interferes with your ability to do your job. So, unfortunately, it could lead to the most extreme is sexual assault. That would be a criminal offense as well as a civil offense.
Yeah, I think the problem in enforcing the law and the problem in obeying the law sometimes, I think, is the gray area.
It's the gray area because I always tell people, if you touch someone on the shoulder, most people don't perceive that as sexual harassment. But if you touch them on the shoulder and you linger with a touch, or the person says, "Please don't touch me, I don't like to be touched," then don't do it.
Yeah,
because that becomes
again,
harassment. That becomes
right.
harassment when someone tells you to stop and you still do it. I share with groups all the time, you're not 14. You're not 12. And so when I tell you to stop touching someone, stop doing that. Be respectful of another human. And so it's really about respect and how we treat people. Now, some people are not aware of their behavior. Some people are huggers. Some people always touch. But I always say if people pull away from you or they hide from you, there's a body clue there that also says, I don't want to be touched. And so many times the person that may be doing sexual harassment, they don't know it, and that people actually like them, but they're afraid to say something and they don't want to get them in trouble, but they're uncomfortable whenever they're around because they're very touchy-feely. And we don't know where people come from. We don't know if we have coworkers that have been sexually assaulted. We don't know that. And you startled them or you scare them, sending them back into a traumatic area. So we have to be aware of that stuff.
And we also have to, as you said, be really affirmative in respecting. So if you don't like something, you need to verbalize it.
Right, and our law doesn't require that you have to do that. But many people are, we're kind of aware, but sometimes we don't recognize it. If I touch someone on their arm and shoulder and they jerk away from me,
That's
and
a
they
pretty
do
good
this,
indication.
it's an
yeah.
indication either I'm more sensitive about what's going on with my body, or you scared me. Now they may say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you scared me." Then maybe that's not an issue. And one of the things that kind of even socially we recognize is that sometimes if we like the person that keeps doing something, we're more likely to forgive things, less likely to say anything. But if we're either neutral with a person or really don't know the person or like them very much, we're more likely to feel uncomfortable. So that's a human response. But really with sexual harassment, it hits everyone. Supervisors can be sexually harassed by the persons they supervise. We always talk about supervisors and owners, the traditional quid pro quo, like you do this for me, I'll do that for you. But ours is growing in the area of hostile work environment. It's really how we treat our coworkers, and that includes vendors, customers, anybody that's coming into our workplace. As a supervisor, you have to protect the people that work under you. And so if you're working at McDonald's and the person delivering bread is sexually harassing one of your line people, you need to step in and say, "Hey, stop." You need to call the company and say, "You can't send that person back here again."
So if you supervise people, you better know what sexual harassment is and is not, and you better enforce it.
That's right, because we don't, when we go with sexual harassment, we don't sue you as the perpetrator. We sue the company. We go after, because we want to say it's a work thing. It is an employment thing. So, but what usually happens to the supervisor that does it is found guilty of it, they usually get fired.
Yeah.
So and unfortunately with the military now, we're seeing the backlashes, and it's kind of sad that the persons that are being charged are actually the ones in charge of the training for sexual assault and training for sexual harassment, and that's kind of sad.
It's kind of a physician, heal thyself.
Correct. That's correct.
Yeah,
do as I say. Do not as I do.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. How can someone find out more information about what sexual harassment is and is not?
Oh, they can give me a call. They can look online. Once again, my direct line is 410-767-8560. That comes to me directly to my desk. You can also email me at keith.merkey, M-E-R-K-E-Y, at maryland.gov. That's my email directly. You can also call, once again, our line, and they can refer you to me. So
The 1-800 number?
1-800-637-6247.
Or go on the website.
You'll go on the website because you'll also find my number there, and you may be able to connect with me through that too.
Yeah, and I got the website. It's a good one. It has information about what these things are, and
Right.
Of course you can always go to the Cherub's website,
That's true.
which has links back and explanations more about what some of these things are. We've got just a couple minutes left, Keith, and I wanted to ask you about, first of all, you do such great training and you get such wonderful reviews. Could you tell us more about how someone can get in touch with you and the various types of training that you provide?
Well, sure. We offer different kinds of training. So, like, for example, conflict resolution, which deals with how we deal with conflict, especially in the workplace or in other areas, recognizing those kind of triggers that cause us to have conflict and how to resolve some of it, how to bring it down, how to deal with a person in a specific conflict. Sexual harassment training, which we come out and talk about what it is, what it's not, and we look at how you can prevent it and how what to do if it happens. We also do discrimination prevention in the workplace. So we talk about what discrimination is, what harassment is, what it is not, what it is, and how we and why we do it. Where does that information come from? So we do that. Also with sexual orientation, we go and talk about what the law is, what sexual orientation is different from things like sexual identity, gender roles, and things like that. So sometimes people mix those up to get more of an even keel about what that really means, the impact of that. Once again, as I said before, you can call me directly because I am the one that you would probably contact and set up a schedule. So it's 1-800-637-6247, my direct line 410-767-8560, or email me keith.merkey@maryland.gov. And just contact me directly. I'll be back in touch with you, and we can set it up.
Great, thank you. It's very important that folks keep critically aware of these things because they're always changing.
That's
and
right.
Updates are critical.
That's right. We can always add. We can always add protected classes and things to our law, and it really is about protecting yourself and your family and your friends.
Yes, absolutely. As you've helped us to understand this day.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you, but unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. For Neighborhood Beat, that's all we have time for today. I want to thank our guest, Mr. Keith Merkey, who does training and outreach for the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, for being our guest. Thank you, Keith.
Thanks, Bill.
Keep up your good work for all of us.
Appreciate it.
And for Neighborhood Beat, I would like to thank you for tuning in. Let's try to be a good neighbor out there in all of our neighborhoods, and we'll see you next time.